Welcome aboard, Giants fans, to episode 51 of Talk is Cheap, our New York Giants podcast right here on NJ.com. This, of course, is the post-draft podcast. The Giants go through the 2016 NFL Draft. They land 6 players. Jerry Reese said the best 6 players they thought they could get. Let's talk about them, including what happened in the first round, landing Eli Apple, a New Jersey kid from Ohio State, to the Giants at number 10. I'm Joe Giglio. With me, as always, Jordan Renan, James Kratch. They're here to talk about this draft and how the Giants now move forward. Jordan, how are you, bud?
Joe, what's going on? 3 days of drafting.
There was a lot. Yeah, and you guys did a lot of work and a lot of coverage for NJ.com covering this thing. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start at Thursday night because that's been the talk around Giants fans for a few days here. The Laramie Tunsil slide begins because of the video that went viral, and it does impact the Giants. A couple teams trade ahead of them. The Titans move up, and of course the Bears do as well. Conklin goes off the board. Floyd goes off the board. The Giants are there at number 10, and Eli Apple is a Giant. Jordan, tell me what your thoughts were that night, and then kind of how maybe. All right, now
disaster. Let's be honest. Disaster scenario. It was. It was a scenario we couldn't even think of beforehand because the circumstances were so outrageous. I mean, Laramie Tunsil. Here's the deal. Ready? The Giants have 9 guys. Basically, there's about 9 premium players in this draft. We're not including the 2 quarterbacks that went, right?
Right.
So you figure the Giants are going to get one of them, and then there's sort of that next level of guys. So you got Bosa, Ezekiel Elliott, Jalen Ramsey. Ronnie Stanley, who actually they like Jack Conklin better, but Conklin, Stanley, DeForest Buckner, Leonard Floyd, Miles Jack, and Laramie Tunsil. Now, those last two guys are the key, right? Because you got 9 guys plus 2 quarterbacks. That's 11. They picked 10th. Everything's good. All's good. Life is great. They're going to get one of those guys, right? No, it doesn't happen that way. Jack's knee is a problem, the medical recheck. He's off their board for the 10th pick. Tunsil's plummeting down the board. Nobody wants to take him. All of a sudden, now there's 7 players, and we're not even counting Jalen Smith, who would have been in that group too, if not for a knee injury that ruined it. So the Giants once thought they're in a great spot at 10. All of a sudden, are sitting there shorthanded in the 10th spot because out of that first tier of players, here comes the Tennessee Titans. They're taking Conklin off the board. Now, the Giants were looking around. They were concerned all day that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers might take Leonard Floyd. That was the guy they wanted to draft. They had targeted Leonard Floyd. They thought they were going to get him, and here come the Chicago Bears. They take him. Now, all of a sudden, the Giants are sitting there saying, wow, I guess the top player on our board is Eli Apple. We're going to go ahead and take him, and they do. Now, this isn't anything against Eli Apple. He may end up being significantly better than some of those guys above that were drafted above him, but it wasn't the Giants' ideal target. And now they have a cornerback who, let's be honest, he's probably going to, play in the slot this year, a position he's never played before. He's the successor to Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. Hopefully it works out. He's got a lot of strengths that they like. He's tall, he's long. My understanding was he was their choice over Vernon Hargreaves because combined with Janoris Jenkins, his size just makes him a better fit. That and the way he played, and his upside. So that's how the whole Eli Apple thing went down. Strange that they end up with Eli Apple. I don't think if you pulled anyone in there, even a week before the draft, that they thought that Eli Apple was going to be their pick at number 10.
James, for you, do you think Jerry Reese got outmaneuvered here, or is it okay to say in the context of a draft, and maybe it won't be for some fans, but it's okay to say stuff happens, right? Like the Tunsil thing happened and the 2 teams trade ahead of him. Is that fair to say, or should a GM not allow stuff to happen? What's your take on how it went down?
I think it's a little bit of both. I agree with Jordan. It's like before the draft even started, because I have my notebook right here, I wrote down what I thought was the nightmare scenario for the Giants. Goff 1 to the Rams, Wentz 2 to Philly. Then it would have gone Buckner to San Diego, Jalen Ramsey to Dallas, Bosa to Jacksonville, Tunsil to Baltimore, Stanley to San Francisco, Conklin to Tennessee, assuming they would trade up, Floyd to Tampa. So I thought the disaster scenario for the Giants would be you're sitting at 10, the only guy from that group left is Elliott, and we go through the whole, do they want to take a running back at number 10, or do they have to go down to the second tier? But the Giants got in a situation where Elliott goes off
They
the
don't
board.
even get Elliott.
Yeah, they didn't even get Elliott, and someone did drop. And it was a guy who had a video of him using a gas mask bong on 20 minutes before the draft started. So you can't win. You have a guy magically drop, and you can't take him because Twitter just exploded. You have Elliott, who is not there anymore. So Jordan's right. They had to do the best that they could do. Now, look, I don't think the Giants could have traded up to 6. Probably would have cost too much. But when Tennessee, I just felt like you saw the Tennessee move and you saw the Chicago move coming a mile away. So I think in that sense, you could say, yes, Jerry Reese got outmaneuvered because he didn't at least try to trade up to 8, although he probably would have had to overpay to make sure he got Conklin or Floyd. I don't necessarily agree with the trade down argument because I don't know where they were supposed to trade down to. 10's way too high for people trying to trade up to get Paxton Lynch. And, as Jordan said, with that finite group of players that are considered elite, there really wasn't anybody left. I mean, maybe someone would have wanted to get to 10 for Vernon Hargreaves, but I don't know what other teams' boards look like, and I don't think Vernon Hargreaves is necessarily a guy that a team's going to want to give up a lot to trade up for.
Right, and that's fair. So, in that instance, what was he supposed to do in terms of a trade down? And sitting at 10, they take Apple. Now, Jordan, you had said a few minutes ago, we don't know. Time's going to tell him what Apple's going to be. But there was a reaction, I think, instantly that night from fans like Eli Apple at 10. How much, if at all, was Eli Apple a reach? Like, where do you think he would have gone realistically? What kind of range if the Giants did not take him at 10?
There was rumors that the Dolphins might be interested at 13, so I don't think it would have been too far. It probably would have been, 13, 15, 16, something like that. Maybe, 18 to 20 at the latest. So it wasn't a huge drop-off. I think he was in that next tier of players. I think that's the way we see it.
And if that's the case, and I think you're probably right on that. It's not like they took a kid that didn't fit at all towards where they were. It just wasn't the player that the Giants probably were projected to get. And as far as moving forward with Apple, what do we think about him playing the slot? I mean, Jordan, you said a few minutes ago he's never played it. James, for you, how much of a concern is that they took a guy that is going to have to play somewhere new in his first year to contribute?
I think it's a little bit of a concern. I don't think it's a major concern. Look, he's the number 10 pick in the NFL draft. And I think whether you want reach or not, he was going to be a first-round pick in all likelihood. So you took him for a reason at number 10. I think that even though he hasn't played in the slot in college, you just have to believe he can play in the slot. I mean, he's a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. He should be able to do what they want him to do. I think that's the attitude and approach the Giants have to have. And obviously they have to hope it works out, but I don't see any reason why he couldn't play in the slot. He just has to do it now.
Yeah, I mean, but you're asking a guy to come in and learn that position, a position he's never played before, and do it at the NFL level. I mean, to expect a guy to come in and have a lot of success at that seems like a flawed line of thinking to me. Now, do I think that should play much into the factor of whether you draft him at 10? Absolutely not. I mean, these are long-term investments you're talking about with first-round picks. You can't worry about how they fit in year one, to me. I mean, if a guy doesn't play year one even a slightest, or even year two, but turns into an all-pro or Pro Bowl player, you go home happy. I mean, you can't think too short-sighted with these kind of picks. I just don't. That's a very, very flawed way of looking at it. I mean, J.J. Watt started 16 games as a rookie, had 5.5 sacks. Second year, he had over 20.
Right. So 1 year, the first year doesn't necessarily at all, obviously, in the NFL, tell you what the kid is. It is more of a long-term investment. How about the elephant in the room? And it's something I was thinking about as the draft was unfolding and as Laremy Tunsil kept sitting there. Now, we know the Giants had and still have some question marks on the right side of their offensive line, specifically right tackle. Now, I guess a two-part question. We'll go to Jordan and then James on this. Did you think there was any chance the Giants would have taken Laremy Tunsil at 10? And should they have?
I think it's an impossible question to answer. I mean, should they have? We don't know the full story. We don't know the full background of what's going on. There's obviously more to it than just this video coming out. There was concerns about him a little bit. You had heard whispers in recent days. Now, the Giants had Laremy Tunsil above Eli Apple on their board. I mean, you can book that. I know as we're doing this podcast right now, Jerry Reese went on the radio and said Laramie Tunsil was not off our board. Now, I get it. Laramie Tunsil wasn't completely off their board, but was he off their board for the number 10 pick? I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that they weren't willing to take him in the first round. I mean, he went up there after, and he said, Eli Apple was the first player on our board without the issues. You know, I mean, the issues, that's Miles Jack's knee and Laramie Tunsil's background and bong. So I don't know if they should have drafted him. We'll ultimately see what these problems lead to. That's the Giants' evaluation in regards to off-the-field stuff or personal problems that this kid might have or personality or character concerns. As a player, of course they should have taken him, but you got to weigh the risk and the reward, and they weighed it, and they didn't think it was worth it.
James, as it was happening, did you think that there was a chance they would take him, or did you think this just, when you add it all together in the moment, this is just not a pick the Giants would make?
During the draft, as we kept on, getting down there, I thought it was a real possibility they were going to take him. I mean, the Giants, Jerry Reese and Ben McAdoo, said, best pick available. Well, I think it's hard to argue that Laramie Tunsil wasn't the best pick available by pretty much any metric, we have available to us in terms of the draft at number 10. I thought there was a chance they would take him. I wasn't surprised that they didn't take him, but I did think it was possible they would do it because best pick available. Now, that being said, I think the Giants were right to pass on him. Before we even get to the background stuff, we talked about this many times before the draft. They would be investing another top 10 pick in an offensive lineman. Now, I know, turns out that if they were going to do that, if Jack Conklin was there and Leonard Floyd wasn't, and at that point, that's what they decided was the best move. But I still stick to that stance that it wasn't the best idea to take another offensive lineman. And two, I mean...
But if given the choice between Tunsil and Apple, I mean, you're still saying you would take Apple if Tunsil had no background problems?
No, I would probably say I would take Tunsil if he had no background problems or slight background problems. But, I mean, I think it would have been a really hard sell for Jerry to take Laramie Tunsil after all that happened that night and to walk out there. I mean, it would have been a feeding frenzy in this area. I think we all can agree on that.
I would hope that doesn't play into it at all, and you just go, who cares if you have to deal with people criticizing your pick? If the guy is going to be Orlando Pace, I really hope that has zero bearing on whether the Giants make the pick or not.
I would hope so too, but it's hard for me to believe that wasn't at least in the back of their minds. Like, I agree with you, Jordan. It shouldn't be, but I do. Part of me does wonder what the reaction was going to be, and if the Giants just said this is just not for us. So it ends up being Eli Apple. He's the number 1 pick, but the rest of this draft also very interesting. And as we go through it, the first thing I notice, Apple, the corner at the first pick, and then we'll get into the next picks. But the next couple picks, a wide receiver, a free safety, and I think I heard Jerry Reese use the term, the NFL and football has become basketball on grass. I mean, this whole offseason, rush the passer, give Eli weapons, stop the opposing passing game. I mean, that's the game the Giants are playing now, and it clearly went into their second pick. James, your thoughts on Sterling Shepard, wide receiver, Oklahoma?
Excellent pick. I think this was their best pick of the draft. He's a guy who, I think he's a guy who can hit the ground running. He's sort of like, Odell Beckham light. He's a guy who can play in the slot, so they've got some insurance now. If Victor Cruz's comeback doesn't go well, and then, they potentially have someone to step into that position going forward into the future. They've got a young, athletic guy who can go get the ball. They said they can put him on the outside. Look, Jordan wrote this a couple of days ago. It's tough to expect a lot out of a second-round receiver in his first year, but I think the Giants can leave the draft thinking down the line they have their number 2 receiver, the guy they can pair with Beckham going forward.
I mean, they're going to throw him in there. He's basically going to be their number 2 receiver. Whether they sign a vet or not still remains to be seen. But they're going to give him an opportunity to go out there and make plays, and we'll see. They'll see what they can get from him. I like the pick. To me, it's Odell Beckham light. be a smaller guy, explosive, not big, but plays a lot bigger than he is listed. Just by his height, he's actually pretty wide. I think he's like 200 pounds. So it's not that he's a skinny little guy. He's actually, I think Mark Rush used the term rocked. So yeah, I mean, I like this pick. I think it's going to be a good pick. He's going to be a good player, and he'll be a great partner for Odell Beckham moving forward. It'll be interesting because they now have two smaller guys. Not that Odell Beckham, I mean, you don't care about his size because he plays big anyway. But yeah, two small guys. It's kind of rare, especially in today's age, to think about two under 6 feet guys being your number 1 and 2 receivers and being studs. But I think they could do it here.
Yeah, I do too. And you don't usually see it. You're right. And even Victor Cruz, if we want to, just throw him still into the mix, he's only 6 foot tall. And I think it opens up the question, how these guys align.
That's
right?
probably a stretch too, by the way.
It probably is, right? He's just listed as that. So maybe he's under 6 foot as well. And that means 3 under 6 foot wide receivers, which if they could play and they play bigger, no one cares, obviously. But alignment wise, do you think they're going to move these guys around? Obviously, we know Beckham, Jordan could play anywhere, slot, inside, outside, either side. But do you think they're going to have set positions, or these 3 might just play everywhere if they're all healthy?
I think they'll move him around if they're all healthy because you want to get Odell and move him around anyway and get him to play in the slot a little bit anyway. He plays 15% something in the slot, so he'll play there a little bit. But if Victor Cruz plays, I think Shepard's going to play on the outside this year. Even though he played mostly slot in Oklahoma, I think his primary spot will be on the outside just because that's where they need him most right now. And him and Cruz will move around a little bit more, and Odell will play mostly on the outside but some in the slot. But, like you said, move around, but with his primary spot, if Victor Cruz comes back, being on the outside.
James, let's go to the 3rd round pick. Darian Thompson, the free safety, Boise State. The first thing I thought is he fits next to Landon Collins. I think we talked all offseason. If the Giants add a safety, the idea of putting a safety that fits with Collins, who's not a cover guy, that has to be part of the thinking. And it seems like the Giants think this kid is that.
Yeah, no, I was a little surprised with the pick at first. My thought going in was that unless they could get a guy like Von Bell or Carl Joseph in the 2nd round, and Carl Joseph ended up going in the top 15, that they would maybe not attack the safety position. I thought that what they did in free agency with not bringing in a veteran safety showed that they were prepared to go forward with the 3 unproven guys they have on their roster. But I definitely think Thompson fits. He's the ball hawk. He's a smart, instinctual safety, a guy who can cover, a guy who also, I guess, has played up against the line a little bit. He can do different things. So I think that was a solid pick. He's a guy who's projected as a 2nd rounder, around Senior Bowl time. A lot of people thought he might be the best safety prospect in the draft, save Jalen Ramsey. So I thought it was a really good pick for them, and I think he's a guy who definitely could end up winning that job coming out of training camp.
And he's a ball hawk from everything we've heard about. What he did obviously in school and all the interceptions. That's something. I mean, the Giants just haven't had that, Jordan. A guy in the secondary that could take the ball away and make plays. I mean, Stevie Brown a couple of years ago had all those interceptions, but he wasn't, to me, anything special. He just happened to have, I think, almost a fluky type of year. The Giants haven't had one of those safeties.
I was about to say that. I think I was, sometimes the ball just pops in a guy's hand a couple of times. It's not that he was this great ball hawking safety.
Yeah, right. They haven't had one of those guys, and obviously, Thompson now comes with that college reputation. We'll see if he does it for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. They obviously, you know what? The more you think about it, the more you like it. I mean, there's the rare guys like Earl Thomas who just has it all. He has the ridiculous physical skill, speed, plus the instincts. But when you think about it, safety is a position, maybe even more than most, that a lot of these guys, I mean, they come out of nowhere. They're not the most. They don't absolutely kill it. It's such an instinctive position, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that you need to know what you're doing and be breaking on ball basically before before it's even thrown. It's such an instinctive position that I think it's an underrated factor when we're talking about it here. And that maybe too often we look at size and speed of these guys. Now, granted, it would help if you have 4.4 speed. You can cover up a little bit if you react a little later. But, there's not many guys who are sitting out there at 4'4", 200 plus and playing safety ready to make some plays. So I kind of like this has really grown on me. I think Darius Thompson's going to be a really good player. And hopefully, think about it. If he becomes a good player, him and Landon Collins will be a tandem for a very long time.
They could be, right. And that's a good point, that the instinct there with the safeties, it's just hard to know that kind of stuff until you watch a guy start to do his thing. The
only thing I want to add is, you know what, with Darius Thompson, though? It might be more realistic to think, he's coming in, he's at a disadvantage, even though, the young guys that have been injured were out a year. They're a year ahead of him in regards to knowing the defense, knowing the playbook. It might take Darius Thompson until his second year to be that starter at the free safety spot. I think that's more realistic.
It probably is. He's the third-round pick. For fans to expect him to come in and just take hold of the starter's job from day one, that's probably a little bit too much to put on him from the jump.
He'll have his chance, though. He'll have a chance.
He will. It'll be a fun training camp battle for you guys to watch, I'm sure.
Definitely. I think Jordan's right. It is a lot to expect a third-round pick to get that job immediately, but I definitely think he'll have a chance with those three guys that are there. It'll be a nice four-man competition, maybe five-man. You got other guys on the team as well, so we'll see what happens.
We move to the fourth round. The linebacker B.J. Goodson, Clemson. Jordan, it feels like every year, or at least almost every year, the Giants draft a linebacker somewhere in the middle rounds, and they did it for a couple years in a row back a little while ago. And rarely do these guys become anything for them. Any reason to think B.J. Goodson might be different? I'm not saying he won't be, but is there a reason for you? Anything pop out to you about this kid that maybe he'll be something?
He's strong between the tackles. You like that about him. He's seems to be a pretty decent athlete. Plays tough. There's definitely some stuff to like. I could see why they drafted him. I keep saying this. It's one thing that concerns me. I know it might seem minor to some people, but he was third team All ACC by the coaches in the conference. Those are the coaches that scout and prepare to play against him, and they viewed at least 6 to 8 other linebackers better than him this past year, and this was his only year really as a player, as a starter at middle linebacker at Clemson. So the fact that he played at Clemson and was viewed as the 6th or 8th best linebacker, that kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit. I'm not going to make my judgment based on that, but just saying.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question, and it's an accolade he has, but obviously I understand what you're saying. He's the third team in the ACC, and he's being drafted in the first 4 rounds. So yeah, I would say the same thing. It's definitely kind of raises your eyebrow a little bit. So he goes in the 4th round. In the 5th round, I think there's some intrigue. Anytime a running back is drafted by a team that doesn't have, obviously that one guy at running back. Rashad Jennings is the Giants' lead back, but last year we talked about it all year long. It was a very strange running back rotation. James, what do you think of Paul Perkins, and what do you think about the Giants' logjam at running back? I know you wrote about it a lot last year during this draft. How does Perkins kind of fit into this thing now?
Yeah, it's no longer a committee. I think it's a running back bureau at this point. The one thing that struck me is, McAdoo, Mark Ross, Jerry Reese, they all said the same thing when they were discussing Perkins. Complete back. McAdoo and Reese both said he can be on the field all 3 downs. He's very elusive, very shifty, one cut and go guy. Doesn't have I think his 40 time was like 4.5 range, but he seems to have ability to break away from people, make people miss. Good receiver out of the backfield. Pass protects well. I think he's a guy who I still expect the Giants to use some form of rotation this year with Perkins and Vereen and Jennings. But I think the Giants took him because they see him down the road as being a guy that they can pretty much have on the field all 3 downs and not really have to rely on a rotation like they might have to this year, and they definitely did last season.
This was the one for me, Jordan, and just going off of what James is saying, that kind of raised my eyebrow in a good way. Like, the intriguing pick. I watched him a little bit at UCLA when they were on. He seems pretty good. He seems like a player that has some ability with the ball in his hands. What were your thoughts when the pick was made?
Yeah, you like it. You think, okay, that's a crowded position. what does that mean now? And it really is. It's interesting. I mean, some of those guys are going to be gone. I mean, the competition is on. Andre Williams, Orleans Darkwa, Paul Perkins. I mean, Rashad Jennings.
Bobby Rainey.
Bobby Rainey, I'm pretty much counting out, to be honest with you.
So
I think he has his work cut out for him.
Battle. Yes.
Yeah, that's for sure. Bobby Rainey might be better off going to another team right now, actually. But yeah, there's a lot of players at that position. And then the more you look at Perkins, you think, okay, I like what I see. And you think about it, okay, he's going to be on the roster, right? He's a draft pick. If things go the way they did last year, and you go through the first 4, 6, 8 games, and the Giants aren't able to have, really establish that running game with a number one guy, because they really don't have a guy who stands out and is so much better than everyone else. If it goes that same way, don't be surprised to see him midseason kind of step in and get a bunch of carries and play a much bigger role. We saw it last year in Arizona with a guy like David Johnson. Plus injuries, it's a position where guys get injured all the time. So at some point, I would almost expect him to make some sort of impact this past year. At first, I wasn't so sure, but the more I thought about it at that position, I bet you he does at some point, get 15, 20 carries in a game.
Yeah, it's a good spot for him, and we'll see if he could be good for the Giants. But it's certainly, I think, a good spot for Perkins in the 5th round out of UCLA. How about the 6th round pick, the final one the Giants made? Jerell Adams, tight end, South Carolina. James, we'll go to you. I mean, this is your neighborhood, the South Carolina kid, Jerell Adams. You know the school. I'm sure you know the player from watching them. What do you think of him? And obviously, the Giants add another tight end to, always what seems like a revolving door of options they have there.
Yeah, I mean, spectacular pick. No doubt about that. I thought it was interesting.
No bias there whatsoever.
None at all. Not at all.
Hey, I said Goodson was a good pick too, But
that's true. The hated Tigers.
The Tigers. I thought it was a good pick. He's a developmental player. He's a number 3 tight end this season. I think maybe a little bit more, but that's probably the expectation level. I definitely, I thought it was interesting because, you look at a guy like Larry Donnell or Jerome Cunningham or Will Tye, the guys they've had on the roster. They've been guys who have established ability in the passing game, and they're pretty raw in the blocking and all that. You've got a guy in Adams who's a little bit advanced in blocking, but he's very, unpolished as a receiver. They talked about his hands, his route running. His ball security leaves a little bit to be desired. He coughed up a big one last year against Tennessee. They were driving to upset the Vols on the road in Knoxville. He got the first down. He was fighting for yardage, holding onto the ball like a loaf of bread, and popped out. Game over. They lose. So that's, I think, a thing that he's going to have to work on as well. But yeah, I thought it's a 6th round pick. He's a guy who's got promise. You bring him in for a year. You work with him. You see what can happen. So I thought it was a good pick for them.
So as we kind of look at this thing as a whole, guys, we've gone over the 6 picks, talked about how the Apple thing happened. I know you guys do draft grades. Everyone does them. How do you feel about this draft now that you kind of look at it as a whole? I mean, obviously in the moment, the Apple pick and what happened there in the 1st round. But as a whole, Jordan, the 2016 draft class, it'll take years to really understand what it is. But right now, what do you think about what the Giants did here?
I gave it a B-. I have no problem with any of the other picks. The first, from rounds 2 to 6, they all seem reasonable to me. I really like Shepard. Perkins is another one that is very intriguing. But, the 1st round pick, when you're picking at number 10, it just seems like you should come away with more of a sure thing. Now, ultimately, I'm not saying Eli Apple won't be good. He could end up being great. We never know. We'll see how it plays out. But I would have, if I were the Giants, especially you told me a month ago, show me the board, and you said Eli Apple was going to be their 10th pick, I would have laughed. I mean, his tape is not number 10 worthy. That says this guy is a surefire, dominant player. So to me, that gave me a little reservation and knocked it down to a B-. So jury's out on that one. I kind of like the rest of them. Obviously, jury's out on them too, but that's where I stand.
James, how about you? Add it all together. What was your kind of your big takeaway of the 2016 Giants class?
I gave the class a B. I thought all 6 picks were good. Admittedly, Apple is not necessarily the guy that you would have pinpointed as the person you wanted at number 10. But all things considered, I don't think it was a bad pick, and I think he could turn out to be a really good player. So I thought I liked all 6 picks, but I don't know if all 6 picks addressed everything. For me, I just thought that maybe they addressed some areas that they didn't necessarily need to address as much. I come back to the whole thing that I know everyone's talking about no offensive lineman, no defensive lineman. They didn't get a pass rusher at all, which kind of took me by surprise, and I think that was something they definitely needed. So I guess I would say if I was running a draft, I think between Perkins and Adams, I think one of those picks I would have tried to steer towards the offensive line or getting a pass rusher.
Why? If you're not looking for this year, James, and you think about it, you say, do they really have a running back? I mean, you're looking to try and hit on a guy for the future. Do they really have a running back? Do they really have a tight end? Do they really have a middle linebacker going to the 4th round pick? I mean, these are positions that, they have guys, but they have guys that are just guys, right?
No, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, I mean, you look at the pass rush situation. They have guys, but they have Vernon, but JPP, he's on a 1-year deal. We don't know what's going to happen. You hope Owa can develop into something, and maybe that's the way they looked at it. Maybe they looked at it as we're basically drafting Owa again because he didn't do anything last year as a rookie. So I
would think that's the case, by the way, because they had confidence when they drafted him, and at the beginning of last year they didn't see him succeed or fail, so they probably still think he's going to succeed. I would think so.
No. Yeah, I would think so as well. So I mean, I get what you're saying. That was just one thing that surprised me. I thought even though they have more proven commodities at those positions than others, I thought they may have brought in one of those guys on the line, but you're right. Tight end, running back, you might have a okay fit for 2016, but in the future, you don't really have a guy. So I definitely understand where they were coming from in that sense.
So what's the biggest question moving forward? I mean, for all intents and purposes, the offseason here is done. I mean, there could be a veteran signing, maybe an offensive lineman, maybe it's still a wide receiver, Jordan. You mentioned that earlier. But for the most part, they did what they did. It spent a lot of money in free agency. Now the draft here. The bulk of what the Giants will do to improve themselves from last year is over. New coach, all the additions, the draft. Add it all together from free agency to now, how did the Giants do? I mean, do you look at them as a team that's much improved at this point, in early May and obviously a lot of training camp and all that stuff to come, or still a lot of question marks? Jordan, what do you feel on that?
Both. I do think they're improved, but they had so many question marks that they still have some question marks. They couldn't fill them all. I mean, look, we could say, they didn't fill their needs in the draft. You hear people say that. Well, the first 3 picks were cornerback, they needed one. Wide receiver, they needed one. And what was the 3rd round? Free safety, they needed one. So, basically no matter what happened, you were going to say they didn't fill all their needs because they had more needs than they could fill, basically, for the short term. This team has holes. They still have holes. Now, are they better? Yes, they're better. I mean, they have some defensive players, significant defensive players they added to the mix. You're talking about free agency and the draft. Vernon, Snacks, Jenkins, Apple now, Thompson. Those are some significant additions to their defense. They're 32nd in the league. You would hope they would be improved a little bit. So I'm not so sure how much they improved offensively because they really didn't do that much. What did they do offensively? Add Sterling Shepard?
Right.
And Will Johnson, the H-back. So
I mean,
that's not a major move.
We're talking bit piece there. So how much better is their offense? Probably not a ton, right?
Right. I mean, we could guess on how much, maybe like you guys said, Perkins could have some sort of impact down the line, but he's not a he's a fifth-round running back, so we don't know what you're going to get there. Yeah, they didn't add much to the offense, but the offense was good last year. The offensive line, is that still the big?
The offense wasn't great, though. I know the numbers say they were really good. They weren't great, though. They had some rough spots where they didn't put up enough points. Where that offense was supposed to be legitimately good and bail out the defense, and they didn't really do it that often.
Not enough, obviously, because they didn't win enough games. Is the offensive line for you, James, still the biggest concern as we sit here in this Monday in early May?
I think it's a concern. I don't think it's necessarily as big of a concern as people make it out to be. I mean, I'd be intrigued what Jordan thinks. At this point, to me, I get the feeling that they feel pretty good about John Jerry as their right guard, and the real position battle is going to be at right tackle, because we've seen in minicamp so far, Bobby Hart's been working with the second-team offense as a right tackle. You have Newhouse there. Maybe they go get somebody, bring a veteran in. They have some second-tier guys they signed. I don't expect any of those guys to necessarily make a big push. But I think it's a concern, but at the same time, it's maybe not as big of a concern as people say it is. I still think the linebacker situation is a little bit, because you have some veteran guys there. Is a guy like Keenan Robinson going to stay healthy? And it's overall, yes, you have all these players on the defense, but how much better is the defense going to be? We know it's improved, but how much is improved mean?
And that's going to be the big question as we move forward here. All right, so let's wrap with this. We talked about all the draft picks, talked about what it kind of means added to the free agent bonanza the Giants went on, spending all that money on defense. Of all the draft picks, each of you give me your thoughts. Of all the draft picks, which is the one that's going to have the biggest impact as a rookie, and then which is the one that maybe people should look out for, kind of like a surprise? Like maybe this guy will have an impact as well. So for Jordan, for you, rookie that will have the biggest impact.
I'm going to go with Sterling Shepard. I mean, it just makes sense to me. They have such a big hole there. He's going to play a big role. They throw the ball a ton. It just, if Victor Cruz has any sort of setback, Shepard's role is going to be huge. He almost has to produce by default. Otherwise I don't know where they're going to turn to at wide receiver unless they go out and sign some veterans. So Sterling Shepard, to me, biggest impact year one. Now, Eli Apple, let me say this. If Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie or something has a problem staying on the field, then his impact can be much more substantial.
James, how about for you, biggest impact, and then someone that to keep an eye on, maybe under the radar in this draft class that could produce?
I would also say Shepard, but it would be boring if Jordan and I just said the same thing. So I will go with Eli Apple. I think he's a guy who's going to be counted on. He played well at Ohio State. I think he's a guy who, I know he hasn't played in the slot, but let's say he takes that slot job and he handles it. I mean, look, slot receivers are on the slot cornerbacks, are on the field like 60, 65% of the time now in the league. It's basically a starting position, your third cornerback. So I'll say he gets that job and he does well. The guy who I would say could be a surprise, I'll say Goodson could be the guy who pleasantly surprises. I get the feeling that he's going to be on every special team. They mentioned that in their press conference. That
I was giving you Perkins, by the way. That's why I didn't answer, James. I figured it was a layup. I took Shepard. I was giving you Perkins.
Well, I'll go with Goodson.
The state of South Carolina.
You couldn't resist, James. Resist.
I'll go with Goodson because they said they love him on special teams. They said Tom Quinn loves him. They mentioned that during the thing. I think he's a guy who's going to be playing a big role in specials. And they seem to think that while his best position would be middle linebacker, that he could potentially also play on the outside a little bit. So I could see him getting in the mix there, and maybe helping out in a pinch at some of those linebacker positions where, look, they've got guys who've had injury issues in recent years.
Let's wrap with this. What is next now in the offseason program? We have the draft. The Giants were in there last week, getting together a little bit. What's next as fans await the next step and seeing these rookies on the field a little bit? Jordan, where do we go from here in this Giants offseason?
Well, the rookies come in this week. They have a rookie minicamp, so it's sort of like an introduction for them. The veterans aren't even there. They kind of just come in just the rookies, get a little orientation of what it's going to be like. And then after that, they kind of mix in with the veterans, and we're underway. And then we'll have some mini camps. We'll have, some OTAs, and the spring we'll see them practice in shorts. And for the rookies, really, they're just trying to get their feet set and figure out what the heck is going on, what the Giants are doing, how this works, get their life settled, find a place to live. So you don't really look at what they do too much on the field as indicative of what to expect. I mean, a guy can be a complete mess in the first month here of trying to learn stuff. But until they come back in the summer for training camp, this is just sort of like a month or two long orientation. Till mid-June? Mid-June, I think it is. I think it's like June 19th.
So that's next, and we'll be paying attention to what you guys write and cover with that. And we'll be back soon to continue to break down this offseason, what these rookies are doing, what they're like, and where this Giants team heads into summer. So the draft is in the books. Eli Apple with the first pick, and we'll probably be talking about him a lot as the summer goes along and we get into the regular season. Guys, as always, Jordan, thanks for doing this.
Anytime, Joe. No better time of the year than draft time.
Always fun. James, thanks, bud.
You got it, Joe. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for listening to Talk is Cheap, our New York Giants podcast right here on NJ.com. If you like the show, make sure to give us a rating on iTunes. It helps us grow as we go along through the summer and the season. Thanks for listening right here on NJ.com.